Hello, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I'll do a little additional intro. So I'm Nic Strack. I use they and them pronouns, and I'm a parenting coach. And when I say that, I mean that I support parents in essentially like coming back online. I think that a lot of mainstream, by that I don't mean like the internet, but I just mean like coming home to themselves. I think a lot of mainstream parenting messaging centers the child to the detriment of the parent, like makes it aspirational for the parent to erase themselves as much as they can. And especially for folks with marginalized identities, of which I have several, the conditioning that comes along with erasing myself is incredibly detrimental to me and all of my relationships, including the one that I have with myself. And so what I do with parents is support them in first cultivating a more aware and conscious relationship with themselves. And then from there, being in a more conscious relationship with their child. I think about it as like an infinity loop. And I have a very parent-centered approach to it. I am married and I have a 3.5-year-old kiddo, and I live in a multi-generational home with my parents. My mom is dying, and so that's been an interesting additional layer to my parenting experience, because a lot of the work that I do has been influenced mainly by my relationship with my mom. So that's a little about me. I will continue to share more about me as I go along. But yeah, I want to talk to you all today about self-care. And I'll start with acknowledging that I think that the mainstream messages about self-care, they kind of, in my opinion, have like a superficial broad strokes definition of what self-care is. And often it ends up being focused on how it looks. So are you getting a massage or reading a book or something where they only talk about like the end decisions that get made? But when I talk about self-care, what I'm really talking about is literally like, what is my energetic like, what are my resources at right now? Where's my fuel tank, my inner resource state? And so when I think about self-care as literally the resources that I have or don't have, it brings it back home to me, what I need, what's important for me, what kinds of decisions replenish or deplete my energy. And it brings the responsibility back to me to be able to make a decision about what is going to feel important for me in this moment. So a lot of barriers to self-care, I think, include cultural conditioning. I'll talk about that like all the time because I do believe that there are so many ways in which we are taught not to not take care of ourselves. I am speaking as a human who's assigned female at birth. I was raised as a good girl in an Asian family, and so I have a lot of like layered messages about how much space I'm allowed to take up, what kinds of ways in which I'm allowed to advocate for myself with other people, especially in my own family, like in my nuclear family. And I don't like nuclear, just like with my partner and my child. So like, am I allowed to ask my husband like to support me in doing something? Am I allowed to tell my child no because I have a no for something, but he has a yes for it? Like that was my cultural conditioning and upbringing. And so I think in a lot of different ways, all bodies are taught that there are certain things that they are not allowed to ask for or do or express or show or experience. And in this way, we have all been taught to kind of like to have a narrower perception of our window of needs than we may actually experience in just like what it means for us to be us. So today I'm really wanting to highlight that the conditioning stuff can create such a barrier to making different decisions when we aren't aware of what might be holding us back from making different decisions. I also totally acknowledge, and we'll talk more about the fact that like there are also like real resource related, support related, financial related barriers. Those are very real as well. And right now I'm talking about the conditioning piece because it's more of a not philosophical, like it's philosophical in the sense that it's intangible, but it's more of like a thing that could be present in the way that you think about self-care, which if you have a chance to break it down, you might discover that you can make a little more room for you in the choices that you're making regarding self-care just by doing some like deconstruction of the beliefs that you hold, like the beliefs that you hold about self-care, what you're entitled to, who you're allowed to ask for what you're allowed to ask for, that kind of stuff. So that's a bit on self-care and the barriers to self-care. When I think about, okay, hold on, sorry, let me pause. Are there any questions? Does anyone have any questions that you wanted to ask or clarifying thingies?
I, of course, have a screaming toddler in the background, so I apologize. You talked a little bit about cultural conditioning from the perspective of gender. And, a couple of folks are wondering if you could also touch a little bit on the role of race and nationality when it comes to the way that our culture conditions us to sort of sublimate our own needs for the needs of others, and how you've seen that play out in your life and how you approach that sort of in your coaching.
Sure. Thanks for those questions. So for me, I'm Asian and mixed race. So my parents are Korean and Indian, and the ways in which that has impacted me are plentiful. But what I've been recently learning about from one of my teachers, her name is Jen McCabe, is something that she calls the culture of contempt. So contempt is, I didn't have this definition of contempt for a long time. I'm only just learning it, and it makes so much more sense to me now as I am learning more about it and noticing it more in my life. But contempt is basically an idea of when I have contempt for somebody else, I think that I am in some way better than them, more capable than them, that I know better, that I can see better, that I need to take responsibility for their feelings because they can't they can't be trusted to take care of their own feelings. They're fragile. So I'm holding myself as like more than this other. And it's also possible to have contempt for myself, where when I have contempt for myself, that means that I'm holding others as more than me. They're more capable, they know better, they know what to do, I don't know what to do. They need to tell me because I don't have the wherewithal to make that decision by myself. Which is different than being like, oh, I've identified a gap in my knowledge, I would like to fill that by learning. That's a different thing. So when I have contempt for myself, it's coming from a place of like, I'm not enough, so someone else needs to tell me something, what to do, etc. And so the way that that is relevant for particularly for my Asian upbringing, and also though it's very much prevalent in the United States and definitely other cultures, although I'm not going to like name all of them. The culture of contempt works by grown-ups raising their children by making all kinds of assumptions about what their kids need. And like as an infant, like newborn infant, yes, totally, this child has, often like one way of communicating, which may be like crying. And then maybe they'll start to also smile and laugh. And then they like may build in the ways in which they can express what it is that they want over time. And the way that contempt works in a parent to child relationship is if a parent or grown up, just like any, person with a child, I say parent because this is like a parenting video, but really it's just with any grown-ups with children. They assume on behalf of the kid and then make decisions based on their assumptions and are not necessarily checking in along the way. And so there are different ways to check in. It doesn't always have to be verbal. I recognize that not all children are going to be verbal, but there are ways to make sure that the grown up in age appropriate ways, I'd say maybe after, I don't know, 1.5 or so, there are ways to make sure that like what you're doing, what you're assuming is actually like correct for what it is that the child wants. And so if grown-ups, my parents, for example, my mom specifically, like she raised me doing like everything for me, made all kinds of decisions for me. She took care, I mean, like in amazing ways, feeds me all these different things. And also she would often tell me what I needed to be doing, which taught me that I didn't know what I needed to be doing by myself. I never really had space to learn how to do those things for myself. She just kind of like told me what I needed to be doing. I didn't know how to. I am now building the muscle of discovering what it is that I want and what to ask for and all of that kind of stuff. But the way the culture of contempt gets perpetuated is she guesses at all of my needs. And then if I grew up and did not do the work that I'm doing right now, then I would think that it was my job to guess at all of my child's needs, and then they would grow up, and then the culture of contempt continues. And especially as it relates to she's a Korean woman, and since I was raised as like the daughter, particularly in patriarchal societies with folks assigned female at birth, there is this aspect of the expectation that they are created to serve others. And like I talk about it as like the myth of martyrdom, which I think often comes along with folks who are assigned female at birth and then become parents. And so like mothers could be expected to put themselves completely aside and just do everything for their kid. And that is a place where this self-care piece becomes so important to pay attention to, because often it's, as I was saying before, it's like aspirational for people to put themselves aside to the detriment of their own well-being. And then what we don't talk about is the connection of how then this child who's experiencing a grown-up who's putting themselves aside to the detriment of their own being, like the child then grows up and becomes that person. Like they learn that that's the way that it's done. And so for me, watching and experiencing my mom doing this and then becoming a mom myself 3.5 years ago and noticing all of the ways in which the ways that she raised me were coming up, and then learning how to and deciding to make different decisions in certain ways has been one of my acts of like deconstructing my own conditioned contempt, and learning how to say, hey, actually, I get to take care of myself. I get to have a no for things. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry, I'm so excited to talk about this. Did that answer folks' questions? If you have more questions, please share.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. So something I wanted to talk about is regarding what you have. And by that, I mean regarding where you're like, what are your resources at? What do you have the capacity to actually hold space for? How can you show up right now? What can you do? What are you capable of doing right now? Like this, I was taught for so long and conditioned to bypass my no. And my no is anytime when someone is asking something of me or telling me to do something or whatever, and on the inside, I'm just like, ooh, nope, I don't want to do that. And like different people experience their no's in different ways. I experience it as a really clear and immediate yes or no. And like caveat, the no is often, it's not just like a no and so I'm like no and I will never do it. It's just like it might sometimes be a no to a particular aspect of it. So a story is Jack really wanted, so Jack is my child. Jack really wanted to do a messy project, and I was not feeling resourced enough to be able to show up as the parent that I want to show up as with him, which is like calm and present and engaged with him and having fun. Not that it's always like that, but I want it to be like that as opposed to like committing to a time that will be filled with frustration, uh, self-imposed. And so he asked if we could do this messy project, and he was so excited about it. And I so had a no for it, but I said yes because I'm supposed to put my child first. And this is like 2 months ago. So this is very much still work that I am doing. Um, because that conditioned belief of like his needs are supposed to come before my own. So like he really needs to do this art project. So I don't get to have a no for this. I was just like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And so I set it up for him and we started doing it, and then we started like getting into it, and he started making a mess. And I slowly started to become more and more like self-imposedly agitated about the mess that was being made. I was like, Jax, don't stir it so much. No, don't, when you pour it, like, don't pour it like that, like that kind of energy of, now it's not fun for either of us because I'm starting to experience this stressedness, and he's not having fun because he can't just like be a 3.5-year-old doing a messy project. Um, and then it just like escalated. And by that I mean I escalated things. Like he's 3, he was just having his feelings. I was also having my feelings, and I was really escalating things. To the point where like an hour later, my husband came downstairs to find us both crying in the kitchen because we were just both like, like it was too much. Lots of feelings, and for me, that was one of the consequences of disregarding and bypassing my no. So had I said or taken even just one moment to like slow that interaction down, where he's like, I want to do a project, and for me to be able to be like, I have a no for this. What is the no that I have? Like, what is it about this that there's a no for? Is it for the whole thing at all ever? Is it for doing the project inside the house because of the mess? Could we do it outside and I would have a yes for it? Could we do it at a later time and I would have a yes for it because my coffee will have kicked in, or whatever it is? Being able to slow down and just kind of like magnify that moment and see what's actually taking place with me is a practice that I've been starting to cultivate, because what I discover is while my conditioned habitual response is just like, I don't get to have a no, so yes, that usually ends up in a situation where it's just kind of a bummer for us because I'm feeling really frustrated about a thing, and then I'm trying to like come down and be more controlling on him so that basically like I want him to be different so I can feel okay. And I don't want to put my 3-year-old in that position, or just like any other human ever, um, in the position of like, you need to be different so I can feel okay. So all of this is coming under this hood of what it means for me to bypass my no, and what does it mean for me to regard my no. Like that's the part of like, okay, I have a no for this. It's okay for me to have a no for this. What do I want to do with this no so that I can show up in a way for myself and also in my relationship with my child that feels aligned with my integrity? Um, and sometimes that may be me saying, hey, Jack, I have a no for this right now. And then I prepare myself to hold space for a 30-minute meltdown because he really wanted to do it. And what has helped me in this practice is being able to decide and take responsibility for the consequences that I'm willing to show up for. Like, I can't always know what the consequences of my decisions are going to be, but I have a pretty good guess of like, if it was only yes, no, like, do we do the project or do we not do the project? I assume that he would be excited if I said yes and upset if I said no. But there's so much more than that, because I also am a human with feelings and feelings, emotions, the ways that I express them, my own resources and such. And so that impacts the experience that we're both going to have, because I decided to bypass my no. So one of the practices that I encourage y'all to consider is learning how to first recognize your yeses and your nos. This one took me a while because of the culture of contempt. I had been conditioned to not think that I was allowed to like say no to people. I thought I always had to just like give and obligate myself to do certain things. And especially as a parent, I had that conditioned belief. So like learning how to recognize, for me, I experience it in my body, learning how to recognize what I have. And by that, I mean, like, do I have a yes for this? Do I have a no? Do I have a yes, but like a modifier, or a no, but? Um, that piece has been really helpful for me in being able to become more aware of how my energy is being impacted by my decisions. So when I disregard my no, I often put myself in a situation where I'm expending far more energy on trying to pretend that I'm okay with what is happening. And that ends up depleting me more quickly. And even in the times when I decide that I regard my yes for something, it could still take energy, but it's a different kind of energy usually, because it's a thing that I've decided that like I'm okay with doing. And of course, Jack may have had a meltdown 2 minutes into me saying yes, and it could have gone that same, it could have been a meltdown either way. But for me, what it comes down to is like, how do I feel about the decisions that I'm making? And while I am used to bypassing my no, so that feels familiar, the more that I've given myself permission to have a no for something, the more I'm recognizing that it actually kind of feels yucky in my body when I bypass my no. The actual no itself is just like a clear, I feel it. I'm like, oh no, I feel it in my like gut sacral area. But when I start to bypass it, I start to have feelings about that. And that often takes me more energy than if I would have just said no and figured out a different way. And I explain stuff to my kid. I am not of the because I said so camp. And to be clear, I'm not like having judgment of that. That's just a decision that I don't make. What I do also encourage in him is like not always needing to have a reason for something. So I will sometimes say, as opposed to because I said so, what I choose to say is something like, hey, I don't want to do this right now. And if he's like, why? I'll be like, I'm not really sure. I just am having a feeling in my body that is a no for this. And I don't want to take the time to figure out why. I just want to honor that my body has a no for this. And so can we do something different, right? Like letting it be okay too, and giving him permission to sometimes just like have a no without needing to intellectualize it. That is a balancing factor as well. So, okay. Questions, comments, anything?
I think, the thing that is coming up for me is just how strange it is to be in a partnership with someone where, for myself personally, my partner has zero problem with a no, zero. And, we have a TV show that we like, and on one of the episodes, one of the characters just said, that's not something that I'm gonna do. And I was like, oh my God, you do that. And I'm like, how? How do you know what I mean? Like, how do you just say that's not something I'm gonna do? With like no guilt, no shame, but also very clear. It's just like, and then if the kid asks, why not? Often my partner will say, that's really messy and I'm just not in the mood to clean up a mess today. I've had to do a lot of cleaning and I'm not gonna do any more. And it's just so fascinating to me how, for whether it's cultural conditioning, whether it's the families we were raised in, whether it's just our inherent personalities, how one person can have no issue and the other person, like I will say yes and yes and yes, and then I will collapse and be like, why am I so upset? And I think it's the thing that you're talking about, which is just not honoring when a no is a no and continuing to barrel through at at my peril and the peril of my kids and my relationship with my kids.
Yes, yes, that is so real. I am now becoming the partner who is really okay with saying no.
Well, I
um,
am jealous.
I will say though, thank you for that, Tristan. I love that because it's also sparked something else for me, which is this idea of a congruent no. So when you were saying that someone could just say no and not experience guilt or shame or something about it and just be like, yeah, no, that is still new for me. At the beginning of saying no, I had all kinds of self-imposed shame and guilt and all these stories of like what a bad parent I am because I wasn't just like giving my child what they wanted all the time. But in just in the past few weeks, I have been learning about what do I call it? It's just like this idea that is basically consistently blowing my mind that if I don't accept and acknowledge my capacity to make all kinds of different choices, I may yell, I may coerce my child, I may like bribe them or whatever, whatever. If I don't acknowledge that I might make those choices sometimes, then if I judge those choices, then when I make those choices, will be taking part of myself off the table. Like I won't be fully present and engaged with the decision that I'm making to, let's say, yell at him because I'm judging myself while it's happening. So there is this skill that I'm learning and practicing, which is congruence, which basically is I figure out what is happening with me right now. What am I up to? What is going on within me? It often is a skill, it's a thing that I choose when I'm feeling discomfort. I'm somehow uncomfortable or judging or upset or just some sort of like internal, like yucky feeling. And so that's when I'm starting to pause and be like, what's going on right now? The way that my teacher, Jen McCabe, phrases it is like that I've encountered a difference I'm not okay with. And that difference can be within me, where it's like, ooh, the way that like whatever's happening in me, I'm not okay with this. What's happening? And so congruence then is this getting congruent is a process of figuring out like what is happening in me right now. And so this idea of a congruent no, where it's like, I have a no for this, I'm not going to do it, and I'm also not going to change my mind, not in a way that's like, you don't get to have a say, or in a way where I'm shutting the other person out or judging their desire to do a thing, but just really honoring, like learning how to honor my no in a congruent way where it's like, hey, yeah, no, I have a no for this, and not like learning how to and practicing not judging it has been a huge return of energy for me, because I've been able to just make decisions and be like, this is what I'm committing to right now. Like, so with Jack the other night, I was laying down a boundary, and I was just like, this is what it is. And I feel like my energy before I actually laid down the boundary was very like wishy-washy, and not in a because we're having a discussion and negotiating kind of a way, but because I wasn't sure about the decision I was making. I felt like I was judging myself for what I wanted to do, which was to just be like, Jack, if you leave your room one more time, we're gonna put the doorknob. There's like this, we have a doorknob lock thing that we put on the inside of his bedroom, because his bedroom's like at the top of this staircase. So when he was young and started sleeping there, we put it there so that he couldn't get out and just like tumble down the stairs. Because, anyways, I was going to explain it, but just that's what the decision that we made. And then we recently took the doorknob off because we were like, hey, seems like you can handle this kind of freedom. And then one night it seemed like he really couldn't handle this kind of freedom. 2 hours later, he wasn't asleep. He'd come out of his room like 47 trillion times. And I was just like, little dude, if you come out of your room again, I'm going to put the doorknob on. And before that, I wasn't like clear on my decision until I was just like, he needs this and we need this. Like, this is a boundary that needs to be laid. And as soon as I did, he just got in his bed and went to sleep. And of course, it is not always going to go like that. But I felt so clean about it And I think it was because I had a congruent no for what he was up to. And I also was just like, I'm not going to judge myself for this because this is the decision that needs to be made right now. So I'm going to make it. And I felt great about it. And so there is an aspect of having a no and saying a no and sharing a no with other people where when I get to that point of like, this is just where I am right now, and letting it be okay, where I'm like, this is where I am right now. That is okay. That piece has been helpful for me to kind of like peel away some of the layers of self-judgment and guilt and shame that I was initially and still do totally sometimes experience while making those kinds of decisions. So if I don't acknowledge my capacity to make any decision, then I will probably be judging myself when I'm making certain decisions. And as a result, I won't be fully participating in the decision I'm making because a part of my brain is going to be off judging me. So it makes it really complicated in the sense of like, then I'm not truly being present with like what I'm up to and with my kid. And by present, I just mean noticing and aware of what's happening in me right now. Like I'm making a decision to do this. Oh, I'm now also judging myself. And now I'm like thinking, I'm caught up in my thoughts and I'm not here with my kid. Um, so thank you for that, Tristan. Did that make sense to y'all? Was that any additional questions coming through?
Yeah, someone said that their therapist told them that you can't like feel bad about, you can't, you know, have a bad feeling and then also feel bad about having that bad feeling, because that's too much work. Like just like let yourself be in your feelings and don't also shame or judge yourself for having those feelings at the same time. That's like way too much work. And that, you know, that sort of brought up for them. It's similar, you know, you can't set a boundary for it for your child and then also feel bad about it. Like that's just too much work. It's too much. And I think you're right. Children do, you know, when they see, and I have kids, of course, all the way up to age 12, you know, when they see that there is an indecision there that can make them feel unsafe, it can also make them feel like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to challenge this. And then it becomes some kind of a weird game.
Yes.
And that happens at every age in many different ways. In fact, while you were doing your first section, my toddler came up to the stairs, having woken up while my partner's at the store, and saw a cookie and was like, I'll go pee pee on the potty for that cookie. And I said, I'll give you a tiny bite. And he was like, no, you know, and it was just like huge meltdown, thinking, of course, and yes, he's disappointed and he also hopes to get a bigger piece of cookie. So yeah, lots of stuff there. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. That reminds me of a hilarious story from yesterday too, which to me it's about how much I learn from my kid about how he just like is where he is. Like the judgment and the shame takes such extra effort. He's just there. He wants what he wants, and then he wants something different, or he still wants that thing. Basically, what happened was he wanted half a bagel. And I said I would give him a quarter of a bagel because I didn't think that he would eat the whole half. And I didn't want to waste it because historically he's been asking for halves and only eating like a quarter. So we had this whole thing and I was just like, I'm going to give you this quarter. And if you finish it, I'll give you more. And he was like, no, like screaming, top of his lungs, screaming so close to my face, which is incredibly dysregulating for me. That's something that I'm like learning how to take care of myself during. But then I was just like, okay, fine, new deal. Like after like more and more crying and I'm holding space for him, I feel so good about how I'm showing up with him. I was just like, okay, new deal. I'm going to give you the half. And if you eat the half, then you can have a half next time. But if you don't eat the half, then next time you get a quarter to begin with. And he was like, okay. So we went over to the counter and I pulled out the bagel and I put the half on the plate in front of him. And he was like, that's too big. I only want a quarter. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Yes. Like he wasn't attached to the fact that he had just spent this last however long it had been of crying and screaming at me at the top of his lungs, wanting this one thing. Because when he actually saw it, he decided he wanted something different. right? And like, how often do I spend time and energy lamenting or like holding myself to this idea of, or just like making a decision now because of whatever had just happened? And I spend energy slogging through all of this stuff and then make a decision instead of just being like, what is true for me in this moment, right? And like, of course, this is not to say that we don't make plans and think about the future and all that kind of stuff, but just in the day to day when we're making like hundreds and hundreds of decisions all the time, how often do I let the decision I'm making right now be impacted by this like a whole, like, what does it mean if I change my mind? What does it mean if I don't do the thing I said I was going to do? And like all of those kinds of beliefs that come. And what is someone else going to think about this choice that I'm making? What if they saw or heard that I did this thing? What are they going to think about me, right? Like, instead of just being like, what do I want? What does my kid want, right? Or like however many folks there are in play, and like what's aligned with my integrity, for as much as I can have access to that in the moment. And I also want to super give permission to folks if you need it. Not that I actually could, but just like so that you hear it from a human that is not you. You get to just feel how you feel, right? Like that idea of like you feel how you feel and don't have the storm on top of it. Also, if you have the storm on top of it of judgment and shame and stuff, like that's okay too. You're there. That's where you are right now. One of my dear friends, their name is James Olivia Chu Hillman. They have this phrase that I repeat on my head in my head that I have thought about for like ever since I heard it. I heard them say it for the first time, and it's, we come by it honestly, and we can choose something different. So like we come by it honestly, the way we're conditioned, our habitual responses to things, the way that our childhoods took place, the ways that we are impacted by how we experience life from moment to moment and how we're creating our experience of life from moment to moment. We come by all of it honestly. It's like it just is. And that's where we are. And we can choose something different. So, like, if this isn't working for me right now, if this doesn't feel aligned with my integrity, if I don't feel resourced the way that I want to, if I don't feel connected to my kid or to myself or to my partner the ways that I want to, I can choose something different. And that doesn't mean that it has to be some like, I need to overhaul my entire life so that I can choose something different. It could just be like, okay, the next time that I feel that feeling that I had when I was like in the middle of bypassing my no, I'm going to make a different decision. For me, it was, I'm going to take a couple breaths to slow down the experience of what was happening. Um, but it could be so small. And I think that that's a huge, really important part of how self-care often gets touted as this like, I don't know, hand wavy thing. And maybe it's not for everyone. I may just be reading the wrong messages, but stuff that like it needs to take a certain amount of time, or it needs to look a certain way, or you need to feel a certain way, all of that stuff. Like, I think that self-care, for me, self-care is regarding my no. It's making a decision to let what I have matter and to bring that to the surface and have that be present in my relationship with my child, to show him like I am a whole human being too. We're both whole human beings here. And like, yes, I am the grown up in this. And there are times that I'm going to make decisions that I may not make if it was another grown up. And I get to have a no for certain things. So like when I think about self-care and why it is an act of generosity, I think that it's not only generous to ourselves because we acknowledge and hold space for and regard our whole human selves, but it's also generous in the moment in our relationship with our child, because then I'm going to show up with him in a way that feels more aligned with me and my integrity and how I want to show up with him. And then it's also generous because it shows him that he gets to be a whole child, a whole human, and as he grows up, that like he is allowed to regard his own needs and advocate for them and ask for what he wants and all of that, right? So like when I talked about when I not when I talked about, but just like when I named this workshop and talk about self-care as an act of generosity, it's because it brings, the way that I envision it is it brings all of the humans back home to themselves so that they can be relating with each other like as their whole human selves. And no part of them is being asked to like wait in the wings or hide or not speak up or not ask for something. It's, I'm a whole human with needs, you're a whole human with needs, what now? So yeah, questions, thoughts, anything?
No, I think for that totally resonated with folks. I don't see any questions, but just a couple of like sort of like, right on. And I'm always super embarrassed that I have to hack my own desire to be completely selfless by being like, no, no, no. But by taking care of myself, I'm actually taking care of my family. And then I'm like, that's so embarrassing. Like, why can't I like literally just want to take care of myself? Like, why isn't that? Why do I have to do this whole mental gymnastics turnaround thing?
I get it. Thank you for saying that out loud. I just recently was on a podcast talking about exactly this. Like, we come by it honestly, right? Like, we think that we're supposed to do all these things for other people honestly. And I called it a trickster move. Like, what I do is I use the scaffolding that I was conditioned into, which is to use other people as my motivation to make decisions. And so instead of thinking that I could leap from I don't matter to I matter and I'm going to do everything for myself, I'm just like a little step from I don't matter and I don't get to have needs or ask for what I want to like I do matter and I do get to ask for what I want, is the step of making it about how it impacts my relationship with my child. I don't have judgment of it because that's what I do. That's what feels accessible to me, right? And to me, it's like hella brilliant because I'm using some of the pathways that are already there and I'm making some different decisions instead of that whole like thinking that I should or could or would be able to overhaul my entire like existence and conditioning overnight to be the person who's like, oh yeah, I just do this all for myself.
That's not
So
something I'm gonna do.
yeah, so the
Yeah,
scaffolding piece, I'm so here for it because I think that that's like, it's also energetically efficient. We know how to do that. Like, we know how to have, like, make decisions because of how it's going to impact other people. And for me, I'm like, hey, this brings more of me online and it, in my experience, positively impacts my relationship with my kid. I'm here for it. I don't think that I'm ever going to be the person who's just like here at the end.
I know, and maybe it's just me that it's like another instance of here is my programming, here's what works for me, but like I also feel bad about that, and so it is that thing where I'm just constantly trying to apply that overlay of, but should it be this way? And so I think it is really smart to just say, well, here we are. Here we
Yes,
are, like here's our wiring or the way that we are now showing up in the world. How can we make that work for us? How can we make that serve it? How can we hack it?
right.
So yeah, that's really smart.
Yeah. Um, okay, so we've got like 13-ish minutes left. I've got some practices to share with y'all. They're just like little things which may or may not serve you. Please, I mean, I can't tell you what to do, but my want is that you take what serves and leave the rest, and that you don't obligate yourself to do things because you think you have to. Just again, from this whole like, should I be doing this? Like, because I said it, like if I say a thing and because I'm the one who's just been talking for the last 100 years, please don't think that that means that you need to like do these things just because I'm saying them. If they don't feel good for you, please don't do them. Because like my whole thing is I want to support folks in feeling taken care of, that they take care of themselves and that they are asking for support and feeling taken care of for as much as they can. And I recognize that's not necessarily accessible to folks. And so if any of these resonate, try them, cool. If not, don't. Okay, so that's like more permission slip stuff. Um, Okay, so first practice is tracking your capacity. You could do this any way that works for you. The way that works for me and my brain is to use a number system. So like a scale from 1 to 10, where I have gotten in the practice of consistently checking in with myself over the course of the day, and being like, where am I at right now? Like when I wake up, I'm like, how am I feeling? I feel like a 7. Um, Go about my business a few hours later, like, okay, where am I now? Or like I often do it in transitions. So like from waking up to getting out of bed, from getting out of bed like to parenting for a chunk of time. I may then like check in at the end of that and be like, where am I at right now? What do I need right now? And then when I start to work, or when I'm finished working, where am I at? What do I need? So like, where am I at? What do I need has been a really helpful combination of questions. Like I may not always be able to get what I need in that moment, but I'm doing my best to try to make it as like accessible as I can. And for us right now, we're super like, I like completely acknowledge the privilege that we hold in living with my parents and there being like 5 of us in this house that my parents own. Um, but like Eric and like we have our finances separate from my parents, so we're on like super trying to conserve resources right now. So I'm doing my best to figure out things that are like to low cost to me and like everything. Okay, anyways, everything has a cost and I totally acknowledge that too. But like drinking water, which I know has a cost, but like moving my body, trying to like sometimes I just like to yell into pillows because it really helps me to move energy through. Um, I have gotten so much more creative about little ways that I can insert like small practices to resource myself over the course of the day as a result of tracking my capacity and noticing like where am I at, what do I need? Because what I need, if I didn't take the time to think about it outside of like the broad stroke self-care conversation, I might think that I always needed like a whole like 2 hours to myself to get a massage and watch TV and something, but often it could just be like, I need to take 10 deep breaths right now. Or like, I need to take a shower, or I need to drink some water, I need to have some food, or I need to have an orgasm, I need to read a book, I need to talk to a friend, like all of that kind of stuff. I need to go play with my kid. Like there are all kinds of different things. But the first practice is like track your capacity and like figure out where you at and what do you need, because that I think that we aren't necessarily taught to pay attention to where we're at and what we need. And so that can be a helpful practice to bringing your self home to yourself again and being like, hey, human that I care about so much and whose needs totally matter, like, where are you at? What do you need? Like, to yourself. Um, I talked about it before, but regarding your yes and your no, and the first step for that is paying attention to what your yeses and your nos, whether it's that what they feel like in your body, if that feels good for you, or what they sound like in your thoughts, if that's a thing. Like, however you experience your yeses and your nos, being able to first figure out how you experience them. And then the next steps would include like learning how to practicing really like observing when they're happening, observing that like, oh, this is a no that I have, like, or like, oh, I just had a no and I bypassed it. Let me go back and like make a different decision if I can, or just stick with that decision and maybe next time you would do it differently. Um, Giving yourself space to let it be okay that you have particularly a no for things, that you don't want to do certain things. And instead of judging it, just being like, hey, yeah, I don't want to do this right now. Is there a way, or like, is there a different way? Or doing that whole like slowing it down and magnifying it and being like, okay, what is it that I don't want to do right now? Like if you feel like you have the resources to do that exploration, cool. If you feel like you don't and you're just like, no, cool. Hopefully you'll be able to get support around like navigating that no in a way that feels meaningful for you. And I know that support right now might just be like not available. And so in those situations where you're not able to get help from folks that are not you, yourself, and you, I encourage you to consider if there are ways in which you can get really creative about being able to insert self-care into the times, even when you're with your kid or kids. So a practice that I have is called mommy taking care of mommy time. And so when I'm with Jack and I need some time to just decompress or something, something that I've done for a couple years, so like we're in the habit of doing it, is to I'll get him all set up. I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna have some mommy taking care of mommy time for the next however many 15 minutes, let's say. Do you want any snacks? Do you want any this? Do you want any that? Get him all sorted with his snacks and his books and his toys or whatever. And then I set a timer, which he can hear like when it goes off. And then I'll be like, okay, so I'm not going to answer your questions for the next 15 minutes. I'm not going to have a conversation with you. I will be having mommy taking care of mommy time. And when I am done, I'll be done when the timer goes off, and then we're going to play. And it's not like always so clean that he's like, okay, cool, and then he doesn't talk to me for 15 minutes. But the more that I'm consistently like and gently advocating for my boundary, if he comes over and asks a question, I'll be like, I'll answer that question after mommy taking care of mommy time. And then he'll like remember and maybe not ask anything for a couple minutes. Like that's been a really generative way for me to be able to take care of myself while I'm still with him, and parenting, like when Eric isn't around. So that's something. So are there ways that you can get creative with taking time for yourself while you're with your child? And what goes along with that is also, if you feel resourced enough to explore, like what beliefs and potential judgments do you have about the decisions that you make to take care of yourself while you're with your child? So do you think that you're not supposed to, like what feels aligned for you, the human, and what might be the conditioning that you've been told, like you shouldn't, like if it starts with a should or a shouldn't, it's often like a conditioned belief thing. um oh, you shouldn't turn your TV on and just like put your kid in front of the TV for 15 minutes to have time for yourself. um and how do you feel about that, and is that true for you, the human, or are you actually okay with doing that because it's going to get you the kind of care and resources that you need so that you can show up in a way that feels aligned for you with your kid, right? Like being willing to look underneath some of the like shoulds and shouldn'ts and judgments that may be uh, sometimes like impeding getting creative about the decisions you're making, because you might take a whole group of possibilities off the table because you like we've been conditioned to not think that any of those are okay. And so the practice of like opening the door and being like, oh wait, I was told that I shouldn't do that, but like me, the human, and with my child, they're like who they are. Is this actually a decision that's going to work for us? And recognizing that like a decision is a decision. It's not you do it once and then you have to do it forever. Like you can make different decisions. And yes, your child may have feelings about you making different decisions. And that's like, I think about it a lot as like resilience building with my kid, where I'm like, hey, I changed my mind. And he navigates disappointment as a result of that, right? Like that's a real life thing. He's not always going to get his way. So my holding space for that helps me feel less guilty about changing my mind, because that's a totally human thing to do. Um, so yeah, those are the things that I wanted to share. Does anyone else have questions or comments or anything?
I know we're bumping up against the end, and I'm wondering if you do. A couple of people are asking about, living with parents and having a multi-generational household, and if you have, any strategies. I'm also sort of reading between the lines up a little bit when you say that your parenting style is quite different than your mother's. Is there tension there? Why are you doing it that way? I wouldn't do it that way. I never would have done it that way. That kind of thing. And how do you manage that and stay sort of grounded throughout that?
I love this question. So we have lived with my parents on and off since Jack was about 10 months old, and he's now 3.5. So we've had like a long period of time getting into a routine that feels like not a routine, but just like a groove of sorts, with all of us being the primary adults in Jack's life. Decisions that Eric and I made before we moved home and after we moved home, in conversation with my parents, included, so Eric and I decided, like, what are our firm boundaries? What are the what are the ways in which we want Jack to be treated that there's no wiggle room on? And for us, there was actually only one, and it was consent. And so we came home and had a conversation with my parents in this, like, hey, we just moved home. We have this 10-month-old or however old he was. Let's talk about what it's going to be like to essentially be kind of like co-parenting / co-grandparenting this child. And so we told them, like, physical boundaries, you always ask him before you move him. Because at that point he was like starting to stand up, not quite walking. But he was clear on like a yes and a no. And that's where he was at that point. And so we asked that they always ask before they move his body, because that's not how they were raised or how we were raised. And outside of that, basically it became a huge window of opportunity for me to learn how to unpack my own shit. All the stuff that would come up with me and my parents, and the ways that they would talk to Jack, and the ways that they would play with him, or what they would say, or the kinds of things that they would do, right? Like, there have definitely been times where I have been like, hey, Mom, can we not talk about bodies in that way, because I don't want to perpetuate like fat phobia kind of stuff. And then I've had a conversation with her about fat phobia and like what that is, and she's like, it's just how I was raised. And I'm like, yes. And I don't want that to be just how Jack is raised, because he's living in a society that's anyways going to bring that in. And so
And
at
you are
home,
a grown-up now, and you get to make a different choice, Mom.
yes, and I don't hold her to different decisions anymore. Like, meaning, it's not that I don't believe that she could make them. She totally does. She even uses my pronouns sometimes. It's a beautiful, incredible gift. And I'm learning how to be okay with, she doesn't need to want to make different decisions the same way that I do in order for me to be okay and to trust that Jack is okay. Right? So like, a big piece is also acknowledging that, like, I am still his parent. Yes, he's living with his grandparents, and he knows that I'm his parent, and he doesn't have the same relationship with them that I did. So he's not going to have the same traumas as I did, because
Oh, he'll have brand new ones.
he'll have brand new ones that I will,
You'll be responsible
delightfully
for.
bring down onto him. Yeah.
Yep.
So that was like a quick and dirty on that living with parents piece.
Yeah, amazing. Because of the pandemic, my partner's parents had to cash out their retirement plan. And so I was like, oh, that was like my second half of my life sanity plan, then that's gone. And so now I'm even now just trying to think ahead to, okay, if they don't have any options, because neither of them can work right now, they're going to be living with us one day. So I'm going to be coming back to you in a few
Yep.
years to ask
Stay in
for your
touch.
advice, which I hope to do anyway, of course.
Yeah.
And I love learning from you. This was just like, this is just so interesting. I love the very specific, doing the check-in with yourself. And it's been sometimes all I have to do is just like get quiet, and then I just listen to my body. And not go to the like, well, this is what self-care looks like place, like you said, of like, you should be having a bath. But instead I'm like, okay, but what do I want? And I noticed over the past couple of weeks when things have gotten really hard for me, I'm like, I want to take my toddler to the park. And like, I have no idea why. And then I get there and I'm like, this is great. Why aren't I listening to my body more often? Because like, we know what we want. It's just a matter of getting still enough and soft enough and being open enough, I think, to listening. So yeah, thanks for
Super
that.
agreed. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being with us,
You're
and
welcome.
thanks to everyone for joining us as well. Make
Yeah.
sure you check out all the other offerings that we have on our online platform, The Neighborhood, at Family Equality, and make sure that you are following Nic on social media at Nic Strack.
Ooh, and
On
also I
Instagram.
just released a free resource, which is all about staying resourced during, like, while parenting through a pandemic. So that's at nicstrack.com//possibilities.
Great.
Yeah.
As
So
long as it's
folks,
not,
feel free.
as long as it's going to make me feel, not going to make me feel bad for all the things I'm not doing in the middle of this pandemic.
No, exactly. That like my whole thing was just like I want to be so gentle. There's a whole section on reminders and encouragements, which are basically like
Great.
you're doing it and it's great. And don't
Good.
feel like you need to do anything different. If you
Okay,
want
good.
to, here's some other things, right? But like it's just like do you.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much. This was a delight. I'm so glad we got to do this. Let's work together more, please, moving forward. And have a really wonderful tomorrow's Friday. Hey,
All right.
that's right. I know days are
All right.
fictional now, but
Yeah.
tomorrow is Friday for what it's worth. And then there will be a weekend. So enjoy that. And thank you again so
Yay.
much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.